Nobody thinks of themselves as someone who begs for love. That's the first thing you need to understand about this. Nobody wakes up in the morning and decides, today I am going to humiliate myself trying to get someone to choose me. Nobody sits down and makes a conscious plan to abandon their standards, to shrink themselves, to stay in something that stopped serving them a long time ago just to avoid the silence of being without it. It doesn't start that way. It never starts that way. It starts with caring. Real, genuine, honest caring. The kind that shows up uninvited and makes a home in your chest before you had a chance to decide if you wanted it there. It starts with seeing something in someone and feeling that pull. That specific gravity that makes another person feel like more than just a person. Like a possibility. Like the beginning of something you've been waiting for without knowing you were waiting. And for a while it feels good. It feels like exactly what it's supposed to feel like. The excitement of a new connection. The warmth of being around someone who makes you feel something. The specific kind of aliveness that comes from being interested in another person and sensing, at least in the beginning, that they might be interested back. And then somewhere quietly, without a clear moment, you can point to and say, that's when it changed. Caring becomes something else. It becomes work, the kind that only goes one direction. The kind where you are always the one initiating, always the one reaching out, always the one making sure the connection doesn't die completely. The kind where you start adjusting yourself to fit what they seem to want. Getting quieter when you sense you're too much. Getting more available when you feel them pulling away. Giving more when you can feel them giving less. Trying to compensate for the imbalance with sheer volume of effort. And you tell yourself this is love. You tell yourself this is what it looks like to be devoted. To be patient. To be the kind of person who doesn't give up when things get hard. To be someone who shows up even when it isn't easy. But it's not love anymore. At some point, without announcement, without a clear transition, it became begging. And the reason you didn't notice is because begging for love never looks like what you think it looks like. Most people think begging for love is dramatic. They picture the big gestures, the tearful confrontations, the showing up unannounced, the paragraph text sent at 1 a.m. that took 40 minutes to write and 10 seconds to regret. And yes, sometimes it looks like that. Those are the obvious moments. The ones you can see clearly in the morning light and feel the specific cringe of. The ones your friends gently reference 6 months later as, remember when you did that thing. But the version of begging that does the most damage is never the dramatic kind. It is the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that lives in all the small daily choices you make to keep someone who has not fully chosen you. The kind that is so ordinary, so woven into the fabric of how you move through the connection, that it stops feeling like begging and starts feeling like just how things are. It looks like texting first, every single time. Not because you're naturally the initiator in all your relationships, because if you don't text first, the conversation doesn't happen. And a conversation not happening means the connection is fading. And the connection fading means they might be leaving. And them leaving means facing the question of whether you were ever enough to begin with. So you text first, not from desire, from fear dressed up as devotion. It looks like making yourself available on their schedule while pretending you don't have your own. Canceling plans you actually wanted to keep because they suddenly became free. Rearranging your entire day around their maybe. Being ready whenever they decide they want you, at whatever hour, in whatever mood, without letting yourself acknowledge how much it costs you to maintain that level of constant readiness. It looks like monitoring. Checking if they've seen your message, watching when they were last active, noticing that they posted a story 4 minutes ago but still haven't replied to your message from this morning, telling yourself not to read into it while reading into it completely. constructing entire narratives about what their silence means, running through every possible explanation, landing on the most painful one, and then spending the rest of the afternoon trying to talk yourself out of it. It looks like softening every honest feeling before you say it out loud so they don't feel pressured or uncomfortable. Saying I was just wondering instead of I need to know. Saying no pressure at all instead of this actually matters to me. Saying I'm fine instead of I'm not fine, and here's specifically why. Translating your real feelings into a more palatable version before they ever make it out of your mouth, because somewhere you learned that your real feelings are too much for this person to receive cleanly. It looks like tolerating behavior you swore you would never tolerate. Behavior you would have walked away from in the first 2 weeks if you weren't already emotionally attached and in too deep to leave without it costing you something. Behavior you would tell your closest friend to leave immediately if they described it to you over the phone. Behavior you stay inside of because you have convinced yourself that leaving means starting over. And starting over means admitting this didn't work, and admitting this didn't work means facing what you've been avoiding. That is what begging for love actually looks like. Quiet, daily, dignity-costing, almost invisible begging. And almost everyone has done some version of it. And a lot of people are doing some version of it right now, today, without the language to name what it is. Let me trace the exact moment usually begins. Because there is a moment, a specific pivot point where something shifts beneath the surface of the connection, and you don't feel it happening clearly, but you can almost always locate it in retrospect if you're honest with yourself. It usually starts with an inconsistency. In the beginning, things felt mutual. They reached out. You reached out. Neither of you was carrying all the weight. There was a natural back and forth that felt like two people who were genuinely interested in each other and letting that interest lead them. And that feeling was real. It wasn't imagined. It wasn't projection. The connection was actually there. And then something shifted. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would give you clean grounds to say something is wrong. Subtly. Their replies got a little slower. The energy felt a little different than it did last week. They seemed a little less present in the conversation, a little more distracted, a little harder to reach even when you were technically talking. And you felt it. Not with your mind first, with your body first. That low-grade, hard-to-name anxiety that settles somewhere in your chest when something you care about starts feeling uncertain. And here is the exact moment. Right there, before you responded. You had a choice in that moment, even if it didn't feel like one. You could have named what you were feeling and asked about it directly. You could have pulled back slightly and let the dynamic rebalance itself and seen whether they moved towards you when you created that space. You could have let it sit without interpreting it as a signal about your worth and just given it time to resolve on its own. But what most people do instead, what you probably did, what almost everyone does, is compensate. You reached out a little more, tried a little harder, made sure the conversation didn't die, because if the conversation died, maybe everything would die. You injected extra energy into the space their withdrawal left. You told yourself you were just being consistent, being warm, being the kind of person who shows up and doesn't disappear at the first sign of difficulty. But what you were actually doing was the first move of a long and costly pattern. You were beginning to carry more than your share of the connection's weight. And once you start carrying more than your share, once you establish yourself as the one who compensates when things get uneven, it is extraordinarily difficult to put some of it down without the whole thing feeling like it's collapsing. That moment, that small, ordinary, almost invisible moment, that compensating text on a Tuesday afternoon when you felt them pulling away and decided to reach harder instead of stepping back. That is where begging begins for most people. Not with a grand declaration, not with a dramatic gesture, with a fear-driven response to a subtle withdrawal that you felt before you understood it. Let me talk about the talking stage. Because the talking stage has become its own specific territory of emotional labor, and almost nobody names how much quiet begging happens inside of it. The talking stage is pitched as exploration. Two people figuring out if there's something real between them, light, fun, low stakes. That's the official story. That's what everyone agrees it's supposed to be. But what it actually is for a lot of people is a sustained audition that nobody agreed to hold, but everyone showed up to anyway. You are performing a version of yourself. You are managing how you come across. You are figuring out what they seem to respond to and subtly, almost unconsciously, leaning into that. You are holding back the parts of yourself that feel like too much too soon because you don't know yet if the full version is safe to reveal. And you are doing all of this careful image management while simultaneously trying to decode where you stand, whether they're talking to anyone else, whether this is actually building towards something real, or whether you are once again investing in a situation that is going to end without a clean explanation and leave you standing in the rubble, wondering what you missed. And the specific begging that happens inside the talking stage is the begging for clarity. You want to know what this is. You want to understand whether the effort is mutual or whether you are doing emotional math in your head that simply does not add up on their end. You want to know if the warmth is real or if you are being managed. But you cannot ask directly because asking directly might scare them off. It might make you seem too serious too soon, too eager, too much. It might end something before it has a chance to become something. So instead you hint. You ask indirect questions and listen hard to the answers for information that wasn't actually encoded in them. You pay close attention to how they respond when you make gentle references to the future or to things you could do together sometime. You watch whether they make actual plans or just talk about making plans as a concept. You analyze their response time and their energy and the length of their messages and the frequency of their initiating, trying to construct a picture of where you stand from fragments that were never meant to carry that much meaning. And all of that analysis, all of that monitoring, all of that careful suppression of your realness so you don't show too much of it too soon, that is a form of begging. It is begging for clarity while being too afraid of the cost of asking for it directly. It is begging to be chosen while performing the role of someone who isn't particularly invested one way or another. The talking stage would be so much simpler and so much less damaging if people just said what they wanted at the beginning. But we have built an entire culture around the idea that honesty about what you want makes you seem desperate, that pretending you don't care makes you seem attractive, and that whoever cares less has the power. And that culture produces nothing but people who are begging with one hand while waving the other one around looking completely unbothered. Let me tell you about a specific kind of person. Because this pattern doesn't just live in abstract emotional territory. It lives in real people with real stories. And sometimes it helps to see yourself in a specific face rather than a general description. There is a man out there right now, genuinely good. The kind of good that is genuinely rare in this particular era of people performing indifference and calling it self-protection. He is the kind of man who checks on people without being asked, who shows up when showing up is inconvenient, who listens in a way that makes you feel like what you're saying actually lands somewhere, who remembers things you said weeks ago and brings them up in a way that makes you feel seen, who cares without keeping score. And he has been loving someone for longer than makes rational sense from the outside. He has been patient beyond what patience requires. He has been consistent when consistency was not returned in any meaningful way. Sai. He has shown up in every form of showing up he knows, and he has watched, with a specific kind of quiet devastation that he doesn't share with most people, as the person he loves continues to hold him at a careful distance. He texts first, every time. Not because he doesn't notice the imbalance, he notices. He is not unaware of what is happening. But the alternative to texting first is silence. And silence feels like ending. And ending feels like giving up. And giving up on someone you genuinely love feels like a kind of failure he is not ready to name. He makes himself available at hours that are inconvenient because the moments she reaches out are unpredictable. And he has learned over months of this to stay ready. He has quietly restructured his availability around her inconsistency, and he calls it being there for someone he cares about. He does not call it what it is, which is organizing his life around someone who has not organized hers around him at all. He downplays his own needs in every conversation. He says he is doing fine when she asks how he is, not because he is fine because he is not fine, but because the conversation always feels slightly fragile, and he does not want to add weight to it that might tip the balance in the wrong direction. He has learned to make himself smaller in the interaction so that there is more room for her comfort. He celebrates her wins with genuine enthusiasm and processes his losses entirely alone. He holds her up and he lets himself sink quietly in the same breath. And he tells himself that this is love, that this is what it looks like to care about someone more than you care about your own comfort, that if he can just be patient enough, consistent enough, present enough, she will eventually see it. She will eventually turn around and notice what has been standing behind her this whole time. But here's the truth that nobody has sat down and told him directly. This is not love anymore. Or rather, his love is real. But what he is doing with it is not love. It is begging. Because love is mutual presence. Love is two people choosing each other. What he is doing is loving alone. And loving alone sustained long enough becomes begging. Because every day he makes the choice to keep giving what is not being returned, he is making a case. He is arguing through his actions and his availability and his endless patience that he is worth choosing. Hokimerus, he is performing his worthiness in the hopes that eventually the performance will be enough to earn the choosing he has been waiting for. But love does not work that way. You cannot demonstrate your way into being chosen by someone who has not chosen you. You cannot perform your worth to an audience of one who has already decided what they think. The energy spent on the demonstration is energy that could be aimed at someone who already sees the thing you are spending so much effort trying to make visible. And what breaks my heart specifically about this man is not that he is begging, it is why he is begging. He is not begging from weakness, he is begging from goodness. Because everything in him says, you stay, you show up, you do not abandon people you care about just because it gets difficult. You are consistent even when consistency is not returned, because that is the kind of person you are committed to being. Those are beautiful qualities. They are genuinely rare. They are just aimed in the wrong direction. Let me talk about unrequited love. Because if begging for love has a purest, most prolonged, most quietly devastating form, this is it. Unrequited love is the experience of loving someone who does not love you back. And what distinguishes it from other forms of heartbreak is that there is no clear ending to grieve. There is no relationship that ended. There is no loss you can point to and say, that is what I am mourning. There is just the ongoing, daily, grinding reality of loving someone who exists in your life as something other than what you need them to be. A friend, a colleague, someone you see regularly who has no idea what they mean to you and no obligation to change that. And the begging in unrequited love is the most invisible form of it that exists, because you are begging someone who does not even know you are begging. You are making a case to an audience who has never been told there is a case being made. You beg with your presence, you make sure you are in their proximity, you make yourself available, you position yourself as someone they cannot miss, cannot forget, cannot fail to eventually see in the way you need them to see you if they would just look closely enough. You beg with your patience. You wait. Month after month after month, you wait, telling yourself that love is patient and real things take time, and one day they're going to wake up and understand what has been right in front of them all along. That one day the friendship will tip into something more, and everything that felt impossible will suddenly make sense. You beg with the quality of your care. You love them so thoroughly, so consistently, so genuinely, that you believe the sheer sincerity of your love will eventually convert them. That if you can just show them what real, deep, abiding attention feels like, they will want it. They will want you. They will see what they have in front of them, and they will not be able to imagine going without it. But here is the thing about unrequited love that is almost impossible to accept, and completely necessary to accept anyway. You cannot love someone into loving you back. Sus. That is simply not how love works. Love is not a response to effort. It is not a reward for patience and consistency and the quality of your devotion. It does not operate on a merit system. It either exists between two people or it does not. And if it does not exist in them for you, nothing you do on your side of the equation is going to generate it. Nothing. Not more time, not more closeness, not more demonstrations of what you would be if they would just let you be it. That is not a statement about your worth. That is a statement about the nature of love itself, about chemistry and timing and the specific uncontrollable, unchosen way that people feel what they feel for who they feel it for. Some people will never feel that way about you regardless of how beautifully you love them. And staying in the unrequited place, continuing to wait for chemistry to be created by effort, is one of the longest and quietest and most expensive forms of begging for love that a person can engage in. And the cost is not just the time. The cost is what you learn about yourself in the process. You learn to love in secret. You learn to contain your feelings because the feelings are not welcome in the full light. You learn that caring for someone deeply is something to hide rather than something to share. And you carry those lessons into every connection that follows, long after the unrequited love itself has faded. Here is something that almost nobody talks about directly. The way begging for love connects to the things that happened long before any of these relationships. Because the pattern of begging for love, the reaching, the compensating, the performing, the staying too long, the tolerating too much, the silencing of your own needs to preserve someone else's comfort, that pattern almost never starts in the relationship you're currently in. It starts much earlier. In the first places where you learned what love is and how it works and what you have to do to keep it. For a lot of people, love was not freely given in childhood. Not in a dramatic, obviously broken way necessarily. Sometimes it was subtle. A parent who was physically present, but emotionally somewhere else entirely. A home where warmth was distributed based on behavior, where you got more of it when you were easy and less of it when you were difficult. Where love felt like something you were supposed to maintain through your own effort rather than something that was simply unconditionally there. And in that environment, Isao, you developed a strategy. Because children always develop strategies, you cannot not develop one. When the environment you are in is giving you information, your brain will find a pattern and build a response to it. And the pattern in a conditionally loving environment is clear. If I am good enough, patient enough, easy enough, agreeable enough, I will receive warmth. If I am too much, too loud, too needy, too honest about what I actually feel, the warmth gets withdrawn. So you get good at managing yourself, at editing what you feel before it comes out, at being the version of yourself that gets the warmest reception rather than the version that is simply, honestly, completely you. At earning love through behavior rather than expecting it through existence. And then you grow up and you take that strategy into every relationship you have. Because it is the only strategy you know. Because it is what love looked like when you first learned what love was. So, when someone begins to pull away, your instinct is not to step back and evaluate the situation. Your instinct is to do what you learned to do, to work harder, to be better, to give more, to demonstrate your value more clearly, to make yourself more necessary, more agreeable, more difficult to lose, because that is how you kept love before, by earning it, by performing for it, by never letting the performance slip. That is why breaking the pattern of begging is not as simple as just deciding to stop. Because the decision to stop requires dismantling something much older than this relationship, requires going back to the beginning and questioning a strategy that once felt like survival. And that is not fast work. That is not comfortable work, but it is the only work that actually changes anything long term. Let me talk about the nonchalant era, because I think this generation's specific relationship to begging is more complicated than it looks from the outside. On the surface, the nonchalant era looks like the opposite of begging. It looks like a whole generation of people who have decided they do not care, who move unbothered, who never text first, who never catch feelings, who treat love like something casual that they could take or leave, that they are not particularly invested in either way, that does not have the power to move them. And the culture celebrates this. It calls it protecting your peace. It calls it knowing your worth. It makes emotional unavailability look like a form of wisdom. It makes people who still love openly, who still catch feelings, who still want something real and are willing to be vulnerable enough to say so, look naive, like they missed the update, like the world moved on to a better operating system and they are still running the old one. But underneath the nonchalance, underneath the performance of not caring, underneath the moving unbothered and the dry replies and the I'm not really looking for anything serious, underneath all of that is a generation that is begging, just begging quietly, just begging in the form of pretending not to need the thing they are desperately hoping to receive. Because what is the nonchalant performance if not a strategy for getting love without having to ask for it directly? What is acting like you don't care if not a way of making yourself feel safer in a world where caring got punished so many times that you decided to stop admitting you do it? The nonchalant person is not free. They are protected. And protection and freedom are not the same thing. Freedom looks like being able to want something and say so without shame. Protection looks like never letting anyone know what you want so they can never use it against you. And what the nonchalant era has produced is not a generation of people who have healed from love's disappointments. It has produced a generation of people who are performing healing while staying exactly as wounded as they were. Yes, who are managing the symptoms of emotional pain rather than addressing the source. Who have found a very sophisticated way to beg for love, which is to perform the opposite of needing it and hope that performance attracts it anyway. It doesn't work. It has never worked. You cannot attract real love by pretending you don't want it. Real love is not a hunting strategy. It is not something you lure in with the right level of apparent indifference. Real love finds you when you're honest, when you are present, when you are the kind of person who can look at another person and say, I am interested in you, and mean it, and hold it without managing their response. The nonchalant era is begging in disguise. And the costume is very convincing, but it does not change what's underneath it. Now, let me go deeper into what happens to your sense of self when you beg for love over an extended period of time. Because this is the part that takes the longest to repair and gets talked about the least. When you spend a significant amount of time in a situation that requires you to earn love, to demonstrate worth, to manage yourself carefully enough that the other person remains interested, you do not stay the same person through that process. You change. Slowly, in ways you do not notice as they happen, because each individual change is small enough to feel like an adjustment rather than a loss. But the adjustments accumulate. You get quieter about the parts of yourself that do not land well with this person. Not because you are ashamed of those parts, because you have noticed through careful observation that they create distance. And distance is the thing you are most trying to avoid. So you tuck them away. Teachers-don, you save them for people who are not this person. You present a version of yourself in this connection that is real but incomplete. A highlight reel rather than the full documentary. You start measuring what you're willing to say against how they might receive it. You run your thoughts through a filter before they come out. Would this make them pull away? Would this seem like too much? Would this give them reason to reconsider? And things that don't pass the filter get kept inside, added to the growing collection of thoughts and feelings and needs that this person has never actually seen. And over time, you realize you have become a stranger to yourself inside this connection. You cannot remember what you thought about things before this person's perspective became part of your internal monologue. You cannot locate the version of yourself that used to have opinions and share them without calculating the impact first. You cannot remember what your needs actually are. Underneath all the management, because you have spent so long not naming them that they have gone quiet. That is identity erosion. And it is one of the most serious and least discussed consequences of begging for love. Because your identity is not a peripheral detail. It is the foundation of everything. Every choice you make, every relationship you have, every sense of direction that gets you through your life. When you lose pieces of it to the sustained effort of keeping someone who requires you to be managed in order to stay, you don't just lose yourself in this relationship. You lose the self you bring to everything that comes after, and recovering it is not simply a matter of the relationship ending. Sometimes you end the relationship and then discover that you don't know who you are without the performance. That the management became so automatic, you don't know what it looks like to just be. That you have been so focused on keeping this person comfortable that you have entirely forgotten how to make yourself comfortable. That is the real cost of begging. Not just the time, not just the dignity, the self. Let me talk about the specific experience of being the one who always gives. You know this role. Maybe you are in it right now. The one who always reaches out first, who always makes the plan, who always follows up after the conversation ends to make sure the other person is okay, who always remembers the thing they mentioned in passing 3 weeks ago and asks about it today, who always shows up with more than their share and never asks to be compensated for the excess. People call this person dependable, reliable, a good friend, a good partner, the kind of person everyone wants in their corner. And those things are true. But what nobody talks about is what it costs to be that person. What it does to you internally when you are always the one who gives and rarely the one who receives. When you are always the strong one, always the available one, always the one who holds space for everyone else's needs, while your own needs sit unmet in a corner somewhere hoping today is finally the day someone thinks to ask. You do not talk about the cost because you have made a story about it. So, the story is that this is just who you are, that you are a giver by nature, that this is how you love. And maybe that is partially true. Maybe you are genuinely someone who finds meaning in caring for other people, but the giving that comes from genuine love feels different from the giving that comes from fear of what happens if you stop. And a lot of people who think they are the first kind are actually the second. The giving that comes from fear is not generosity. It is a protection strategy, a way of making yourself necessary, of giving people a reason to stay that is based on what you provide rather than who you are. Because somewhere you learned that who you are might not be enough by itself. But who you are plus this much effort, this much availability, this much reliable warmth, that might be enough to make someone choose you. That is giving as begging. It is indistinguishable on the surface from genuine generosity, but it comes from a completely different place. And the difference matters because genuine generosity leaves you feeling full. Giving as begging leaves you feeling depleted and invisible and vaguely resentful in a way you feel guilty about feeling. Because you chose this, nobody forced you to give this much. And yet somehow you are still the one left holding the weight while the person you gave it to has moved on without even noticing it was ever heavy. Let me talk about the late night version of all of this, because begging for love has a nocturnal dimension that is worse than anything that happens in daylight. And most people who have been in this pattern know exactly what I mean. During the day, you can manage it. There is movement, noise, obligations, things that need your attention, and pull it away from the question that lives underneath everything. You can stay busy enough that the feeling exists only in the background. You can tell yourself a functional story about patience and timing and things having a way of working out. You can look at your phone and decide not to send the message you've been drafting in your head. You can talk yourself through it. But the night is different. The night takes every coping mechanism you built during the day and dismantles it in the first 30 minutes of silence. And in that silence, the things you managed all day stop being manageable. They become the only thing in the room. You lie there and you replay the last conversation you had with them. Not casually, forensically, looking for the specific moment where the energy shifted. The exact sentence where something changed. The thing you said that you think might have been too much or not enough or somehow wrong in a way you can't articulate but can feel in the way the conversation ended. Looking for the explanation for the silence. Looking for something you can fix. You pick up your phone without deciding to. You check if they've seen your last message. You notice they were active 12 minutes ago and they did not reply. You tell yourself it doesn't mean anything. You spend the next 40 minutes certain it means something. You construct conversations in your head. The ones where you finally say the right thing and they finally hear you and everything shifts. You craft the perfect message that is honest without being too honest, direct without being too direct, warm without being desperate. You write it in your head, you revise it, you decide not to send it, you almost send it, you put the phone down, you pick it up again. And in the middle of all of that mental activity, in the quiet and the dark and the 3 a.m. unguardedness that strips away every story you've been telling yourself, the real feeling surfaces. Not hope, not patience, the raw thing underneath both of those. I am exhausted from reaching toward someone who keeps their arms at their sides. And that exhaustion is not weakness. That exhaustion is your body and your nervous system and the deepest, honest part of you trying to communicate something your more managed self has been refusing to hear. That what you're doing is not sustainable. That what you're doing is not love, not anymore, not in any direction you can point to that serves you. Yitas, that you deserve something that does not leave you awake at 3 a.m. rehearsing conversations for someone who falls asleep without wondering if you're okay. Those nights are real. That exhaustion is real. And it is your most honest self trying to point you toward the exit. Now I want to talk about the moment they come back. Because almost everyone who has been in this pattern knows this moment, and almost no one talks about what it actually reveals. You finally find some ground. It took weeks or months of quiet private work, but you have found some ground. You have stopped checking their activity status every hour. You have stopped drafting messages you never send. You have started falling asleep without their name being the last thing in your head. You are not healed. You know that. But you are breathing in a way you weren't before. You have some of yourself back, and then they come back. Sometimes with an explanation that almost makes sense. Sometimes without one at all. Sometimes with exactly the right amount of warmth. The warmth that made you stay this long. just enough to make you forget the months of distance that preceded it. Sometimes with a casual message that acts like nothing happened and dares you to bring up that nothing if you want to seem dramatic. And here is the moment. Right there, before you respond. Because everything in you that has been waiting, the part that never fully accepted that it was over, the part that kept one metaphorical hand on the door just in case, that part activates the second you see their name on your screen. It says they came back. They realized. They finally understand what they were missing. This is the thing you were waiting for. All of that patience was building toward this. And maybe sometimes that is true. Sometimes people do come back, genuinely changed. Sometimes the distance gave them the clarity they needed to understand what they had and what they were doing by keeping you at arm's length. Sometimes it really is different the second time. But more often, far more often, they come back for the same reason they came back the last time and the time before that. Because they miss the access, because they know the door will be open, because the certainty of your love is comfortable in a way the uncertain world outside is not. Because they are going through something and you are the person they go to when they are going through something, not because they have chosen you, but because you have always been there before and they are counting on that continuing. And the hardest question in that moment, the only question that actually matters, is not, do they want me back? It is, why do they want me back? And are those reasons the same reasons as last time? And if they are the same reasons, what makes you believe the outcome will be different? Because taking someone back who has not changed anything fundamental about what made them leave is not a second chance. It is the first episode of the same season starting again. Different month, same story, same ending already written. Let me draw the clearest line I can between loving someone and begging for someone, because they can look identical from the outside and feel very different from the inside, and the distinction changes everything. Loving someone looks like this. You care about them genuinely, and the caring comes from a place of fullness rather than fear. You show up for them because showing up is meaningful to you and feels like the right expression of what you feel. You invest in the connection because you believe in it and because you have seen evidence that the investment is shared. You make yourself available because you want to be, not because you are afraid of what happens if you are not. You work through difficulty together because you both want the thing enough to do the work. Begging for love looks like almost all of those same things except the crucial internal difference. Every action is coming from fear rather than fullness. Every gesture is powered by anxiety rather than genuine desire. Every show of care is partly a show, performed for an audience of one with the hope that the performance will be convincing enough to earn you the place you haven't been given freely. Loving feels like giving. Begging feels like bargaining. Loving feels like choice. Begging feels like survival. Loving feels like you could stop. You could walk away. You could end this tomorrow if it stopped being right. And you stayed because you want to. Begging feels like you cannot stop. Like stopping would mean something terrible you cannot quite name, but can feel in your chest when you get close to the idea of actually ending it. That feeling in your chest is the clearest signal. Love does not trap you. Love expands you. If the thought of walking away from a connection feels like losing oxygen, rather than losing something you chose, you are not in love. You are in a survival pattern. And survival patterns are not love, even when they contain genuine love, even when the love is absolutely real. Because love without mutuality is not a relationship. It is a wound you are nursing in someone else's living room. Here's something that people who beg for love almost never hear said directly and almost always need to. The reason you beg is not because you love too much. It is because you believe you are worth too little. That is the actual mechanism, not passion, not devotion, not being too caring or too loyal or too good at loving. The belief, usually unexamined, often unconscious, that you are not the kind of person who gets chosen without making a case for it, that your worth is not inherent but demonstrated, that you have to earn the right to be wanted rather than simply being wanted because you exist and you are who you are. And I want to say something about that belief that I want you to actually hear rather than just read and move past. That belief is a lie. A very convincing lie, built from real experiences, reinforced by real disappointments, confirmed by real people who made you feel like you had to earn them. But a lie nonetheless. Your worth is not determined by whether someone chooses you. Your worth exists independently of anyone's choosing. It was there before this person. It will be there after them. It exists right now, in the middle of all of this. Whether or not they ever send the reply you've been waiting for, you do not become more valuable when someone wants you. You do not become less valuable when someone doesn't. You are not a currency that fluctuates based on market interest. You are a person, and your personhood, your depth, your capacity to love, your realness, all of the things that make you you, those things have value that does not require external validation to be real. The begging is what happens when you forget that. When the belief that you must earn love overrides the truth that you deserve it simply by being here and being yourself. And the moment you genuinely internalize the truth, not just think it, but feel it at the level where decisions actually get made, the begging stops. Not because you have decided to stop, because you no longer have a reason to do it, because you understand that love does not require performance from you. It requires a person from you. And you have always been a person. You have just been hiding that person behind the performance for so long that even you forgot which one was real. Let me talk about what the pattern looks like from beginning to end, because sometimes seeing the whole arc at once reveals something that is invisible when you are standing inside any one part of it. It starts with hope. Genuine, honest hope. You meet someone or you develop feelings for someone, and you let yourself believe this might be it. This might be the thing you have been waiting for. And hope is not the problem. Hope is how it has to start. Then comes the investment. You put real things into it. Time and attention and care and vulnerability. You let them matter to you. You allow them access to parts of yourself that you protect from most people. And investment is also not the problem. Investment is necessary for anything real. Then comes the first inconsistency. The first moment where what they give does not match what you have given. And this is the pivot point. This is where the story either corrects itself or begins the descent into begging. Because the healthy response to the first inconsistency is to name it. To say, I noticed this and I want to understand it. Or to create space and see if they step forward. Or to let time do its work without panicking. But the begging response is to compensate, to give more, to reach harder, to tell yourself that if you can just be patient and consistent and present enough, the imbalance will correct itself. And so you compensate. And because you compensate, they never have to. Because you are carrying both shares of the weight, they never experience the natural consequence of not carrying their own. They never feel the absence of what they are not giving because you are filling the gap with what you are giving. You have made it possible for them to give you almost nothing and still have you. And this continues. And the gap between what you give and what they give slowly becomes the normal shape of the connection. It becomes the weather, just how things are. And you adjust to it. You lower your expectations in small increments to match what is actually being given. You redefine what you deserve until it looks like what you are receiving. And you call this growth. You call this being realistic. You call this accepting that love is not perfect and people are complicated and you cannot expect too much. But what you are actually doing is disappearing, piece by piece, choice by choice, into the shape of something that requires less of them and costs more of you with every passing month. That is the full arc. And seeing it laid out like this, it becomes clear that no single moment in it was the catastrophe. Every single moment was small. Every single moment could be justified in isolation. The problem was the accumulation. The problem was the direction. The problem was never any individual choice, but the pattern those choices created together. Let me talk about what stopping looks like in real practical terms, because I think a lot of people know they need to stop, but they cannot visualize what stopping actually feels like from the inside, so they do not know how to begin. Stopping does not look like a confrontation. It does not require the big speech or the ultimatum text or the formal acknowledgement that you are done. Those things can happen, and sometimes they should, but they are not what stopping is. Stopping looks like texting first one fewer time this week than you did last week. It looks like noticing the specific moment when you pick up your phone to check their activity and choosing just once to put the phone back down. It looks like making a plan with your own life, a real one, not a placeholder, that does not leave a gap specifically sized for them to fill with their maybe. Stopping looks like the next time they ask how you are, telling them something true instead of fine. Not to be dramatic, not to create a situation, just to exist as an honest person in the conversation instead of a managed version of yourself, and then watching what happens. Whether honesty is welcomed or whether the warmth cools the moment you stop performing contentment. That information matters. That information is something begging was preventing you from having. Stopping looks like letting silence be silence without rushing to fill it. Your last message sits unanswered. The old version of you would have sent a follow-up within the day. Something casual. A meme, a reference to something you talked about before, some low-stakes reason to reopen the conversation that is actually just another reach disguised as casualness. The stopping version of you lets it sit. Not because you do not care, because you are giving the connection space to show you what it actually is when you are not holding it up. Stopping looks like redirecting energy, all the mental energy you spend analyzing their behavior, constructing explanations for their silence, building narratives about what their choices mean, taking that back, putting it somewhere that uses it well. A goal, a friendship, a version of your own life that has been sitting on hold because you have been pouring everything into a connection that does not pour back. Stopping is not cold. It is not punishing. It is not a strategy to make them miss you, or a game designed to make them come running. It is simply you deciding that your energy is valuable and that you are going to start treating it that way. That you are going to stop spending it on a connection that cannot return it and start investing it in things and people that can. Now I want to begin building toward the ending, because this needs to travel somewhere. I have been sitting with you in the reality of what begging costs and how it starts and why it continues. But I want to walk you through the door on the other side of all of this. And the door has 3 parts. The first part is hope. Not the fragile, desperate kind of hope that functions more like a prayer than a belief. Not the kind that requires a specific outcome by a specific date in order to survive. The durable kind. The kind that does not depend on this person or this situation or this season turning out in any particular way. That kind of hope looks like this. It looks like honestly acknowledging that the pattern you have been in, the begging, the reaching, the performing, the one-directional love, that pattern is not a permanent condition. It is not what your life will always look like. So, it is not the final word on what love is available to you. It is a season, a hard, clarifying, costly, character-revealing season that many people move through. And on the other side of it, not in a fairy tale way, but in a real human way, things look different. The begging stops not because love arrived, but because you arrived. Because you arrived at a version of yourself that understands your own worth, clearly enough that begging is no longer even on the table as an option. Hope here is not hope that this person will change or this connection will become what you need it to be. Hope is the belief that love is still possible for you, that the story is not over, that this season, as exhausting as it has been, is not the whole story. That somewhere, not on a schedule you can control, not in a form you can predict right now, there is a connection that does not require you to earn your place in it. That love is real. It is not theoretical. It exists. It exists for people who have been through exactly this, who have come out the other side of begging, having learned what they were not willing to accept anymore. And that learning, that specific knowing that comes from having given too much for too long, is not a wound. It is a compass. It tells you immediately and clearly when something is not right. And that compass is one of the most valuable things this season gave you. Hope looks like believing that compass will guide you towards something better. The second part of the door is self-acceptance. Real self-acceptance, in this specific context, means something that is harder than it sounds and more important than almost anything else. It means accepting that you have been begging, not to punish yourself for it, not to turn it into a story about how broken you are or how little you value yourself, but to see it clearly and honestly and without the softening that prevents real change. You were begging. It cost you. And understanding what it cost you and why you did it is the thing that makes it possible to stop doing it. Real self-acceptance here also means accepting the version of yourself that started begging. The one who learned early that love was something to be earned. The one who compensated for inconsistency instead of naming it. The one who gave more than their share and told themselves it was devotion when it was really fear. That version of you was not stupid or weak or broken. That version of you was doing the best they could with the tools they had in the environment they were in. And those tools were real. The generosity was real. The patience was real. The love was absolutely real. The problem was not the qualities themselves, but the direction they were aimed. Toward people who could not or would not meet them. Toward connections that were structured in a way that required you to keep giving without receiving. Toward a pattern that was familiar because it echoed something older than all of them. Self-acceptance means looking at all of that with honesty and compassion at the same time. Saying I did this and it cost me, and I understand now why I did it, and I am not going to do it the same way going forward. Not from shame, from understanding, boo. And self-acceptance means accepting the part that is perhaps the hardest, that your worth was never the variable, that whether or not any specific person chose you was never actually about whether you were worthy of being chosen. It was about their capacity, their timing, their readiness, their own unhealed things, and none of those things were yours to fix by loving harder or waiting longer or giving more. You were always worth choosing. You just kept choosing people who were not yet capable of seeing it. And the third part, the empowerment, the part that asks something real of you. The part that does not just comfort but challenges. Stop begging. Not as punishment, not as a performance of self-worth for someone else's benefit. As the most genuinely loving thing you can do for yourself, which is to refuse to participate in your own diminishment anymore. Because here is what stopping actually creates, beyond the obvious benefit to your own dignity and peace. When you stop, when you actually stop, when the compensating and the reaching and the managing and the performing all go quiet, the truth finally has room to surface. The dynamic can no longer hide behind your effort. It has to reveal itself as what it actually is without your constant work propping it up. And one of two things happens. Either the other person feels the absence of what you were giving, and they step forward. They reach toward you the way you have been reaching toward them. They initiate the conversation, they make the plan, they demonstrate through action that they want you to stay. And that is information, real information. The kind that your constant effort was previously preventing you from receiving. Or they don't step forward and the connection fades. And that is also information, the most important information. The answer to the question you have been asking through all of this reaching and staying and hoping. The answer you were afraid to find by stopping, which is why you never stopped long enough to find it. Either way, you get clarity. And clarity, even when it confirms the thing you were most afraid of, is so much lighter than the weight you have been carrying in its absence. Because at least now you know. At least now you can make decisions based on reality rather than hope dressed as reality. Stopping is how you find out what is actually there. And then, once you know, you can build something real with that information. Also, you can grieve what wasn't there if it wasn't. You can step forward into something genuinely mutual if it was. You can stop spending your energy trying to create an outcome and start simply receiving the truth of what exists. That is power. Real power. The kind that does not come from being chosen by any specific person. The kind that comes from understanding that you are someone worth choosing. That your love and your time and your consistency and your care are genuinely valuable. That they deserve to be placed somewhere that can receive them and return them. And that placing them somewhere they are simply consumed without return is not love. It is waste. And you are done with waste. Now I want to speak directly to the person who is sitting with this right now. Not as an abstraction, as a specific person who has been in this. Who is maybe in this right now. Who has read all of this and felt seen in ways that are uncomfortable because being seen means there is nowhere left to hide. You have not been begging because you are pathetic. You have not been begging because you do not know your worth. You have been begging because you love genuinely in a world that is not always capable of receiving genuine love. Because you brought everything to a situation that was built for something less. Because your depth, your capacity, your realness walked into a connection designed for surfaces, and you could not understand why it would not go deeper. You are not broken for having done this, but you are allowed to stop. You are allowed to take back the energy you have been pouring into this and put it somewhere it returns to you. You are allowed to decide, without drama and without announcement and without waiting for permission from anyone, that you are no longer available to anyone who requires you to perform for their choosing. You are allowed to be chosen because of who you are, not because of what you provided, not because of how hard you tried, not because your effort finally wore them down into deciding you were worth keeping, because they looked at you, the whole you, and knew. That kind of choosing exists. I want you to know that with certainty. It is not a myth. It is not something that happens to other people and not you. It happens when you have stopped filling your life with connections that require begging and made room for the one that doesn't. It finds you not when you perform yourself perfectly, but when you finally fully show up as yourself without the performance. And when it arrives, when someone loves you without conditions and without requiring you to earn it, the contrast will be so clear and so profound that you will understand something you could not have understood while you were still inside the begging. You will understand that all of the reaching was never for them. It was always for the version of yourself that finally understood you did not have to reach, that you are worth the kind of love that comes to you rather than the kind you have to run toward, that the love you deserve does not ask you to be less or more or different. It asks you to be here, just here, exactly as you are. And that is where it finds you, right here, exactly as you are. Will you stop begging? Not because begging makes you weak, not because the person you've been reaching toward was not worth it. Not because love is not worth effort, but because you deserve the kind of love that doesn't look like begging at all. The kind that flows so naturally in both directions that effort doesn't feel like effort. It just feels like two people choosing each other, because choosing each other is the most obvious thing in the world. That love is yours. It has always been meant for you. Stop bending toward what cannot hold you. Stand up and let the right thing find you standing.